All right. This is the Spiral Jetty by Robert Smithson. It was made in 1970, and it's in Utah in the Salt Lake, on the Great Salt Lake. And as you can see, it's a spiral. It's really large, and you can see the scale of it here with the people in the background. This is what we call an earthwork. And right away, you could say the elements of design being used here are a line that creates a spiral. It also has texture. It has scale. It takes up a serious amount of space. And then we can also see that time is having an effect on it. Like time and the elements since the 70s have changed the rocks, have changed the structure. And depending on what time of day you go and how high the water levels are in the lake. And if sometimes there's crystals on them, salt crystals, and it just depends. I think there's some good examples of it over here. So here's like the individual shapes in the rocks making up the jetty. So this one I think is significant in the sense that this is the elements of design point to potential meaning as well, which Robert Smithson was interested in entropy and this idea of all things kind of go back to chaos and to decay. And this really, the Spiral Jetty really points that out. It points out that this isn't going to last forever. Even this big monumental spiral, this jetty, is going to be affected by time and affected by the elements, and eventually it may go away. And that's an important thing to pay attention to with art, that time and the elements have an effect on it, and then it could potentially affect its meaning. I think another good example of this is, so this was made in 1970, another good example of this, but it points to a different meaning, is the prehistoric, the Neolithic movements, and the Neolithic people who were building hinges. This is the stone hinge at Avebury in the UK. Notice that the hinge, or this ditch and the rock circle, goes around this whole little village of Avebury. And over here you can get a sense for its scale, right? These rocks are really big. They're like twice the size of humans, 3, 4, height-wise. And so this is a significant structure that was built in 2600 BC by the Neolithic people. Now, this isn't necessarily about entropy like Robert Smithson's, but it's similar because it's made up of rocks, it's made up of stones. They're placed in a line, which creates a circle, which creates a shape. And the scale is really important here, right? It's a really large space. I like to say, like, whoever moved these rocks, like, meant to do it, right? Like, this was a serious endeavor. To this day, we're not quite sure how they moved them. Some people have theories that they may have pushed them on ball bearings, but we'll save that for another lecture. But what I think is important is that the elements of design exist in these hinges. And they're being expressed, right? And depending on what angle you have, whether you have an aerial view or an up-close view, of course, each rock has a texture. The earth itself has a texture. It also has a color. And so the elements of design are expressing themselves just as much here as they are in the Ellsworth Kelly paintings or the Anselm Kiefer paintings. And they were made by these Neolithic people. One thing that's really, just a side note about the Neolithic people, what they find quite frequently in these sites where the hinges are buried remains, buried cremated remains. And so they think they acted very much like cemeteries. And I think one of the things that's interesting about even the modern era in which we live in, we still mark our graves, our burial sites with rocks. They may be more sophisticated in the sense that they've been carved or sculpted, things like that. But you get what I'm saying. Like, this is an ancient idea. It goes back to 8,000 BC of people marking burial sites and remains of their loved ones with large stones. All right, so then another artist that I like to point to that used the elements of design in an interesting way, both with time and motion, is Edward Muybridge. And Edward Muybridge had a bet with Leland Stanford at the end of the 19th century whether or not a horse's legs, all 4 legs, came off the ground. And there's this famous story that they had a bet that, one person bet, I forget who was who, but bet that all 4 legs did not come off the ground. And at the time, the human eye couldn't tell. And so Muybridge set up a series of cameras for an experiment, and had a horse run in a straight line, and from the side he photographed the horse, and you can see clearly here that we can see the motion of the horse being expressed in these series of 2D images, these photographs, and you can see here that the horse's all four legs do come off the ground when the horse is running. And then Muybridge performed a whole bunch of experiments with people jumping and running and doing calisthenics, both expressing motion and also time, a sense of time, like the beginning of the jump, the end of the jump, the beginning of the run, the end of the run. So this is I think this is a great example of time and motion being used as an element to express something. And in this case, he also did animals and birds and flight. They're quite beautiful. And if you want, I'd feel free to poke around more about Edward Muybridge. He did a bunch of amazing things. This is a little link to the bet that they had. Now, this is another, I think, a really interesting piece that deals with time and motion, but it also has texture and light and shape and space. And this is a film that was made by Stan Brakhage in 1963, and it's called Mothlight. I'm just going to play a little bit of it for you. Might even back it up here. We'll go back to the beginning. It's called Mothlight. So what you're looking at here, I'm just going to stop it. Hey now. What you're looking at here are moth parts. Stan Brakhage took moth parts, moths that had flown into lights and at night, and he collected the moth parts from moths that had died by flying into windows or flying into a lamp or a light. And he took those parts and he glued them to celluloid. And he created it's an 8-minute film of moth parts that have been glued to celluloid, put together and run through a film projector. And so what you're getting is the textures and the shapes of the actual moth parts that look like lines and shapes, but you're also getting the time and you're getting the motion of the time-based film, right? You're starting at the beginning of the film and moving through the moth parts. So you get these abstract shapes and this movement and sense of scale, but they're all from moth parts. So this was meant to be seen as a projection from a 16 millimeter movie projector. So the thing that we are not hearing, sound would be part of this as well, is the sound of the 16 millimeter film projector playing. I'll add a link to this on our Moodle site too, so you can come back to it. And then I think what we'll end on is Roman mosaics. I love these Roman mosaics. They're actually called micro mosaics. I'll zoom in on. Here's one of Dionysus. You can see this in the Antiquities Museum in Rome. And notice here what you have is all these little shapes of stone and ceramic put together to create shapes, to create lines, right? To create this wavy line all the way around, to create this square and this rectangle and the shapes of Dionysus. So it's very much pattern-based, but it's also got this figure in here. And the color is really important. So this has the color, shape, form, and it's being used in a really powerful way. And in a way, this kind of reminds me of the spiral jetty, right? Like laying down little rocks, not to make a spiral, but to make a design and a pattern and an image of Dionysus. So I think that this mosaic expresses the 8 elements of design very well too, because this has lasted the test of time. I believe this is about 400 BC in Rome. It was found in a villa somewhere in Italy. I forget which one right now. I think it tells us at the bottom here. The Via Flaminia. And so it's quite beautiful, but it's all the elements of design. It's all the elements of design, all included in here to create this amazing little micro mosaic of Dionysus. And there's some other examples over here as well of mosaics. Mosaics are amazing expressions of the elements of design, because they have the shape and the color and the lines, all created using these little tiny pieces of fired clay or stone. So these are good examples of how the elements of design get used across time by different artists for different reasons, and also sometimes point to the meaning of the pieces as well. So I hope you find this helpful. If you have any questions about the elements of design, or if you have any examples that you'd like to share, feel free to send me an email or share them with a group in the discussion forum.